Hello, everyone. This is Grandmaster Hans Zeman back with the chapter on the move 3 to f5. We're going to be going into the starting Jobava London system. Here, we're going to be analyzing how we respond to our opponents playing the move bishop to f5. Bishop to f5 is arguably one of the most logical, I don't even know logical is a good way to describe it. I'd say it's a very natural and common move because our opponents are sort of given the opportunity to develop this bishop before bringing the pawn to e6. So sort of getting the pawn outside of the pawn chain is always sort of a positive thing. And this is another chapter where, after further analysis, I sort of changed what I thought, was the best. Going into making this course, I thought that I would just sort of recommend my Jobava London repertoire at that point. But creating the course and analyzing and doing all that was honestly a really enjoyable experience for me because I got to find so many new ideas. I got to improve on my previous knowledge. So in this case, the move that I had been playing a lot before and played one too many times is f3. And the idea is to sort of immediately go for the g4 break. And however, from a realistic perspective, from an objective perspective, I wanted to find another way to put pressure. Because again, after f3, it's like I said, I'll give this as an example. In e6, I didn't want to recommend e3 here, because I didn't like how simple things were for black after bishop b4. In this case, after bishop f3, bishop f5, sorry, f3, e6, sort of g4, bishop g6, h4, they can play h6 or h5. I didn't really like how simple it was, and I wanted to make them to make some. I wanted to force some difficult decisions. I wanted to give them some opportunity. So I've chosen to play the move e3 here, or recommend the move e3. And the reasoning behind this recommendation is that we're actually going to take quite a positional approach here and take advantage of this bishop on f5 and argue that this bishop on f5 can be used to our advantage. Now, there are a few ways that our opponents can develop. E6 is the most natural by far. I've included a6 and c6 because they're relevant for multiple reasons. I'd say the main reason I've included c6 is because in this position, c6 is quite a common move. And after e3, bishop f5, I wanted to sort of leave this position out of the 3c6 chapter to simplify things, just so all the positions where we started with bishop f5, you could sort of put them in one chapter to keep things simple. So after bishop f5, e3, c6, and a6 we'll get into, which are sort of can be transpositions in some respect, because a6 is also a move here. So after a6, e3, bishop f5, there's some weird transpositions. But anyways, getting to the point, after e3, e6, the idea that I found to be quite silent but deadly was bishop to d3. And I found that this position actually gives us, quite an interesting dynamic in this specific position, because it poses a difficult question to our opponents. Now, whenever there's tension between two pieces and there's a possibility for trade, the battleground or the circumstances under which this trade happens is always up for debate. In this specific case, we want our opponents to play bishop takes d3 because we want to take back with the c pawn, and we'd actually like to double these d pawns to open up the c file for the rook, and also to open up the b3 square for the queen to come to and put immediate pressure on the queen side. So first of all, if our opponent's playing an autopilot and takes this pawn and we take back and we get an advantage, and let's say our opponent continues with a very natural move bishop to d6, we can punish them immediately with queen to b6. And now this b7 pawn is a bit awkward. Usually you would defend with queen c8. But in that case, the queen's a bit passive on c8. We could go knight to e2 after that. We could even take on d6 rather. However, b6 is the best move. However, in this case, after takes, knight f3, castles, this double d pawns actually work to our advantage, and the c file is open for business. We can double on the c file. Sort of weaknesses. We have a leading development as well. So this is sort of a way that black can even quickly go wrong. So in this case, taking immediately is already a mistake, such a natural decision. And now our opponents can go back. And in this case, we really want to force them to take this bishop, so we play the move h4. The point behind h4 is that we want to play h5 to force the bishop to take. We really want to, take this, force our opponents to double our pawns, because the structure, as I mentioned, is advantageous. In this case, they can take and then argue that h4 is a move that we don't want to have included, because at some point it could be somewhat overextensive. So that is a potential argument. You can also go a6, which is, I think, a very natural move in anticipation of h5 in this position, because the a6 sort of position allows b5 as an option and also covers the b5 square for the knight. However, in this case, well, of course, we're threatening to play h6 here, which would create quite some holes on the dark squares. It's natural to play h6 to prevent that. Now, after knight f3, again, there are quite a few ways for black to respond here, right? We've got knight to b7, we've got c5, we've got bishop d6, a lot of ways to develop. But in all these cases, we've got little ways to put some pressure on opponents, right? A normal developing move like knight to d7 is a mistake because of e4. And at this point, we're putting immediate pressure in the center. And sort of a direct threat is to play e5, which would force the knight back to g8 or to h7, which would be a crucial waste of time and very passive. I think here after e4, our opponents are forced to, if bishop to e7, we play e5. And at this point, if the knight, let's say, retreats to g8 or to h7, we can even aim to go for rook h3, rook g3, putting pressure on g7. This is sort of like a French position. But in this case, the best part of having these double pawns is that if they ever play c5, we can always recapture and then replace with this other pawn. So our central structure is going to remain extremely solid, regardless of what our opponents do. Again, I should note rook h3 is also an option here immediately as well. And you can go king f7. You can sort of delay e5, but you're going to be playing e5 and transposing regardless. In this case, the best move is actually to play d takes e4, takes, which is, again, also not that natural because you're undoubling these pawns. And after bishop b4, queen e2, you have to go c5. Again, another very difficult move to really fully challenge the center. And after d5, again, I could go into really details here, but I just don't think it's that realistic that our opponents are going to go for this. But I guess the main point should be noted that we have a very strong center. We're putting immediate pressure. Taking on e6 is an idea. And let's say if we were to get this pawn structure with the f, g, and h pawns, we'd be to have an isolated pawn on e6 would be quite weak. We can't really recapture because of takes, and the king would be stuck in the center. So there's some very difficult decisions to be had for black here. So instead of knight to d7, bishop d6 is another natural move, putting pressure on the f4 bishop. Now, as I mentioned before, you notice this motif of after bishop d6 playing the move queen to b3, taking advantage of the overworked queen. And in this case, if bishop takes f4, we play the in-between move, queen takes b7. If the bishop moves back, we would be taking this rook. So after knight d7, we pick up the bishop. Now we're up a pawn. And our opponents, in order to even, if they play a move like castles, we're simply going to retreat and just be up a pawn. So they have to play c5 before castles, another extremely difficult move. And in this case, we simply castle castles in g3. And I decided to end the variation here. But again, you should know that this h5 pawn is going to fall. However, we do have this sort of majority on the queen side. a7 is a bit weak, and there are a few logical continuations here that don't really matter much. But I think the main point here is that it's a little bit unbalanced, and we've got some targets and some weaknesses that we can target, and our position's very, very solid, right? These double pawns are actually pretty nice, and the structure's solid. We're going to aim to maybe put more pressure on the queen side, and the end games are always going to be favorable, just because of this 2-on-1 with the A and B pawns against the A6 pawn. So that's one continuation. If that's a way we can punish after bishop d6. Our opponents can play c5 immediately, but again, you'll notice that we just have a lead in development, and after queen to b3, it's just, I think you'll notice the theme, right, of queen to b3 and how crucial it was to this, it's all a very thematic thing, right? Like, if you go all the way back here, we play bishop d3 because we want to take with a pawn, just so we can play queen b3 before they're castled and developed, because queen b3 is just puts really direct pressure. So the entire sequence, h4, a6, h5, takes, is all just to play this queen b3 idea, which is really, I think, nuanced. And after queen b3, b5 is the only move. We take and play a4, and once our opponents are forced to play b4, because if they play sort of b takes, then we can take back with a knight, and now we're attacking the bishop. We're attacking the bishop. The bishop can't really move anywhere. Like, if it moves back, there might be like a knight b6 idea. This pawn structure isn't that bad, so it's better to play b4 to sort of keep things solid. But after knight e2, knight d7, d4, rook c1, the main positional point from this position is that we have this pawn structure is slightly overextended. So there's sort of some holes, it's not really that well protected. There's some weaknesses. And the idea is to sort of take advantage of this long term, and to sort of slowly improve our position and take advantage of these weaknesses, because they're sort of overextended. And when there's overextension, there's some holes that are left. Maybe the c6 square as a whole. We have control of the c file. The bishop on f4 is strong with its diagonal. The bishop on e7 is sort of stuck, unable to challenge its bishop on that diagonal. So it seems like a lot of in these sort of positions, after we force our opponents to take on d3, we're getting some dynamic pressure, and we're forcing some difficult decisions. So, we covered bishop to g6, which is the best move. However, it's definitely not there's many other logical moves that we should cover. I think, first of all, bishop d6 is a move that I face, especially in one of the games that we're going to, I play a model game that I'm going to show and we're going to look at. And in this case, our alternative idea is revealed. And in this case, we're going to be doubling these pawns and taking an extremely positional approach. And I think the great thing about this opening especially is that it's sort of training you to play different types of positions and develop a diverse array of skills. In certain positions, we're playing g4, going for a very direct attack. But in this case, we're taking a very slow positional approach. So I think developing these diverse skills and these abilities to play different types of positions is really important for just general chess improvement. And I think the openings that you play really mold you as a player more than you realize. So in this case, after e takes, we play the move knight c to e2. You might ask yourself, why not knight g to e2, developing the knight and protecting the bishop? However, this knight on c3 is just a bit awkward. So playing knight c to e2, then bringing the knight to f3 is just a lot more natural. And it also leaves this idea with c4 as well, putting pressure on the center. Because as we see with the doubled pawns, the center becomes a little bit, black center becomes a little bit more of a target, because we can break with c4 and put some pressure. And eventually, let's say we play c4 and we sort of create some weaknesses, then these double pawns really start to become a weakness. If your castle's knight f3, c6, just consolidating things, castles. There are a few ways black can play, but I don't think that this is not really something you need to memorize, but need to understand. There's knight e4, there's rook e8. In both cases, we're going to be playing b3 to prepare the move c4. And then the queen's going to come out, and then we're going to put pressure on d5. We can extend with a4. Bishop a3 is the sort of a weird move that I've shown. It's the best move according to the computer to sort of restrict, take the c1 square, which our rook would like to occupy. But after c4, the idea here is we're going to play knight to e1, knight to c2, kick out this bishop. We can even kick out the knight from e4. And then again, we're going to slowly extend on the queen side and sort of ask our opponent what they're going to do with these doubled pawns. Because from a long-term perspective, these pawns are clearly a liability just because of the central play. So, okay, we can look at rook e8, but b3 as well here with c4 and the exact same idea. So this is a way we can get a very nice positional edge. I mentioned bishop takes d3 as well. A strong move is c6, actually. It looks quite counterintuitive because you played c6 and then you played e6. So just from a visual perspective, it's not that natural to put the squares, especially with c6, d5, e6. You just sort of leave some light dark square holes. So it's sort of weird to do this from a intuitive perspective, but there are some ideas to it. One of them sort of consolidating center, perhaps giving the b6 square for the queen. However, in this case, we're going to just play knight to f3. And again, we still have this dilemma, right? We're still kind of threatening to take on f5, or sort of just waiting, giving our opponent to a decision to make. Because again, they can go bishop g6, they can go bishop takes d3, and we would take back with the pawn, and we would continue with the same queen b3 ideas, e4, rook c1, e5. So the same ideas loom here. And this is obviously an improved version, right? Because you could just sort of imagine it, like let's say they played bishop takes d3, cd3, and then c6, which is just like a very weird move. So this is just an improved version. So after here knight f3, bishop g6, now we castle, knight d7, and then we play h3. So in this case, we're actually just going to take an extremely simple approach, and we're going to go for the immediate e4 break. The reason we're able to go for this idea is because our opponent has spent these two sort of tempos on e6 and c6, and they haven't been, let's say, the best use of their time. So after bishop e7, we go queen e2, castles, and we go e4. The sort of threat is to play e5. Again, this e4 ideas, we've seen this throughout the course. Obviously, you don't really want to allow e5 because this knight would have to be forced back, and then we would take some space. So after trading, takes, trading everything. This looks probably very familiar to you if you are an e4 player or a Caro-Kann player. This is a classic Caro-Kann structure with e6, c6. And again, it's just a very slight advantage because you have a space advantage and a slightly better center. The bishop is well placed in comparison to the e7 bishop with control over this diagonal. You're going to, perhaps knight f6, the queen will retreat. You put the rooks in open files. You bring the pawn to c4. You have a slight advantage and you just play chess, right? But again, it's a very comfortable, very natural position and definitely does not carry much risk as white. But I would say that c6 combined with e6 has been unlikely, but I really wanted to make this detailed since it is a lifetime repertoire. And I don't think that the Jobava, is regarded by a lot of people as something you can play as a lifetime repertoire and something that you can exclusively play with white. So I really wanted to show the power of the opening and sort of the details behind it as well. So after bishop b3, I think there's a6, which is again not the most natural move. But here again, we're going to go for some very immediate, concrete attack with knight f3. Again, knight b7 is a move, but I think first e6, and we go knight e5, and this is where we're gonna have some fun, and we're gonna play our favorite move. I guess the arrow has already revealed our idea. But after bishop b4, we go g4, and we're really targeting this bishop on g4. And the funny thing is, the only move here to equalize is actually knight takes g4. And the idea is after knight g4, h5, knight e5, g5, the bishop is trapped. However, you actually sacrifice the piece back and go bishop e5. Again, this bishop dominating in e5, attacking the rook with tempo. The king is still bad on f7, and our opponents are actually forced to take this knight because you want to double these pawns before we have the chance to develop with queen to d2. So after trades, rook h7, bishop d3. Again, I didn't want to go too much into depth here because, again, I could write a book on this position. It's just such a complex position. But I think we can sort of safely conclude that with the bishop pair, with the weak king, and just with how awkward this structure is, that black is just a bit. Black is under some serious practical pressure here. And I think practical pressure is a great sort of word and phrase that I'll repeat throughout this course, and a great way to explain the general sort of complex positions that we reach, right? From a practical perspective, the two bishops with a weak king, this is a natural position, right? You can go queen f3, you got pressure on f5, you can even castle queenside. Maybe there's an e4 break, rook can come to g1 to attack the g5 pawn. And I've probably drawn so many arrows and highlighted some things you're confused, but I think giving just an array of possible options might help you visualize the potential ideas that could arise here. So in regards to our sane opponents who are playing bishop to g6, we continue with bishop to g2. And here there's knight to bd7, and there's also knight to e4. So knight to e4 is sort of going for a very direct approach, right? Putting pressure on the king and saying, well, you got a pin here, and I'm going to win your pawn. I think I'd like to cover knight bd7 first, though, because I think it's a bit more natural. Just sort of noticing that this e5 knight is extremely strong, and in combination with the next move, h4. The main idea is, let's say we play h4 here. In response to the usual response to h4 is h6 or h5, but let's say h6. Now knight takes g6, and you're forced to take back with the f pawn. And after you take with the f pawn, usually you take it with the h pawn, and you sort of keep this connected structure, and the rook activates. But then that g6 pawn is going to be extremely weak. Like, let's say h6 takes. You can play queen d3, targeting g6. You're going to castle next. You've got the bishop pair. So this is sort of the central idea. And here we're forcing our opponents to do some magical things to escape this bishop. First, they must take on e5. Then they must play knight e4. Then after bishop takes e4, bishop takes e4, f3. Any sane person who looks at this thinks the bishop is getting trapped. They must see the move d4, pitching the pawn to open up the diagonal for the bishop to retreat. After e takes d4, now they must play bishop takes e3 first, because if you retreat the bishop to d5 after queen to d3, I'm ready to castle next, and I'm simply up a healthy pawn. But after bishop takes e3, bishop d5, queen d3, you must continue the extremely precise play with c5, c4, bishop c6, dc5, queen a5, bishop d2, queen takes c5, queen c3. Again, extremely complex. If I tried to explain this, honestly, it's just ridiculous. But black is basically, I'll go through this bit slower. Okay, anyways, the point is that c4 is a threat, right? If white can consolidate here and be up an extra pawn, right? If you can get like c4, bishop c6, like rook d1, d5, and you're just crashing through, you're dominating. However, white does have a little bit of a weak structure. It's a little bit loose, especially after c5, c4. Anyways, we check, bring the bishop back, and we go queen c3. The idea is to protect the e5 pawn, maybe bishop c1, bishop a3, maybe bishop e3. And I've ended the position here. And I don't want this concrete line to sort of overwhelm you. But I want you to see that in this position, when we play the move h4, it's not like, our opponents are playing on autopilot and they can just castle their king and they can play some normal move. They're really forced to find extremely difficult maneuvers to save the position, not get in an extremely bad position. So already showing that you have to play knight e4, you have to play d4, you have to take on cd first. Like, these are not easy moves. This is extremely nuanced detail. And this is even just to equalize. Is representation of just how strong this opening is. So please don't get too caught up in the concrete variations. Oh, how am I going to memorize this? It's too much. It's too complex. This is a representation of the central themes and how difficult it is from a practical perspective. So, as I mentioned before, knight to e4, this is where we're really just, sacking pawns is a central theme. We castle, we say, here's the pawn, rook to b1, b5, bishop to g3. Now, this is all members aboard. The F pawn train is going down. It is not stopping. It is going to be a steamroll attack, and there's absolutely nothing black can do to stop this continuation. Let's say you castle like a normal chess player would. H4. I said F4 there. Look at me. I don't even know my theory. But you know how I would learn my theory, guys? I would use the move trainer to help me memorize and understand my theory. I guess I got to go get to work on that move trainer. H4, F6, takes, queen D3. Things are already collapsing. I would like to note that this H5 was the threat. If you go bishop B4, then F3. So H6 was no other choice. F6 was no other choice. Takes, queen D3. You pick up the G6 pawn. Now you've got the two bishops on the diagonals. You've got a weak king. You've got a bishop on C3 that just looks like a big pawn. And this is just after a normal move like castles. Let's say you play B4. Of course, the only move, so natural, so normal, protecting the bishop when it isn't even attacked. Then to play F4, then to play bishop B4, and then F5, takes. And I want to give a disclaimer. This is going to be one of the most impressive variations that you're going to see. And this is just like this is really shows how much work and how the details that I found here and the theory that I'm creating here. I really would not release this course. I didn't really think that this is some cool, stuff. There's another S word I was going to use, but there's probably kids watching, and I want to be a good role model. After the move knight to d7, which is a very natural move, right? We play knight c6, and after queen f6, we play e4, sacrificing a pawn, threatening to play e5, threatening all sorts of things, fe6, breaking open the position, right? And after f takes e4, you might think, oh, d5, break things open. No, h4. We're down 2 pawns. We're keeping everything on hold. And after e takes d5, we play d5. And in this position, we are down 3 pawns. But our opponent's king is in the center. This queen is on the verge of being trapped. Our rook, bishop, queen can come in a flash. Queen to h6. The only move, getting the queen out of the way. Rook takes f5. The queen is still basically trapped. Queen to d2. Our opponents have to. The only way to survive this is by just trading the queens. And even after the queens are traded, the attack continues. Rook takes f5, queen d2, takes. Bishop takes c7. I've lost count of the pawns because honestly, I don't care how many pawns I have because I see this strong pawn on d7. I see the dominating on c6. I see the bishop on c7. I see the king on e8. I see the terrible pieces. So I don't care. I don't care what the material is here. f6, trying to bring the king out. Bishop a5, ready to take the next pawn. King f7, takes. Okay, I guess I left it here. Again, move trainer, terrible. So at this point, the material is even, I think. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I still can count. That is nice. The material is even. However, we're not counting material. We need to count the quality of our pieces and our pawns. Knight is dominant on c6. We've got 2 connected passed pawns. The king is still stuck on f7. The knight restricts all active play from the rooks, covering the crucial b8 square. This position is absolutely dominant. And the fact that this came from sacrificing 3 pawns continuously is an absolute beautiful representation of the strength and the utter danger that we are presenting with our opponents when they play such natural and normal moves, right? Which shouldn't get them into trouble. So, and this is the best part. Let's say they castle. As I mentioned, this f-pawn being a train going on an unstoppable track that's going to run over absolutely anything that comes in its path. f6. Now, this pawn, once it is shutting down any counterplay that black might have, and after g5 is played, this queen is coming in and is lights out. Boom, 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 boom. These pieces are non-existent. They're doing nothing. gf6, bishop h4. Bishop is coming to f6 no matter what. You can't take because the bishop takes d8. Let's say knight d7. Takes, takes, takes. GG. g5, queen comes in. You've got no defense. Your pieces are dead. So, it's if you're telling me that if our opponents want to make a draw, they have to survive our onslaught of sacrificing 3 consecutive pawns only to find the way to trade queens, then I simply don't have faith in humanity, because I think that this is just, from a practical perspective, this isn't even like bad by the computer. This isn't, the computer is not, it's not like I'm lying to you guys. I'm saying, and you turn on the computer is going to say this is all bad. These are all the computer's top choices. It's just that I've chosen specific lines that put and maximize the most pressure on our opponents. So if you're not impressed by this, then I don't know what's going to impress you. But I promise you, there will be more impressive variations throughout this lines. And again, I'd like to reiterate, and I've reiterated, again, English is not my first language. Or at least I don't want you guys to know that it's my first language. I will say that I was actually fluent in Dutch. And this is a reflection of my inability to speak and remember things. I was fluent in Dutch. I was living in Netherlands for 3 years. I left Netherlands. I could not speak. I didn't speak. I forgot all of it. I was fluent. I learned language in 3 months. I was fluent going to school. And I forgot it. Right. So, okay. Anyways, tangent aside. There's going to be, these concrete variations. I mention this a lot, and I reiterate this throughout my annotations. These concrete variations are not are not me saying, oh, no, you got to memorize this, you got to memorize this, you got to memorize this. It's simply an illustration of the themes, an illustration of the danger you're putting your opponent under. Mic drop, 1, 2, 3. Yep, there we go. Okay. So we've covered this line. So here, we've covered both this. So another move we can cover is knight to d7, which is a little bit weird. But again, we play knight to e5, and it should know that after e6, g4, it could transpose after bishop g6, bishop g2, bishop b4. So it still kind of transposes, which is why I've only covered the move knight takes e5 here. But in this case, we take on f5. Knight returns to c6, and we play queen to d3. And here, the central point is we've got the bishop pair, but we've also going to sort of really weaken our opponent's structure. And we're not going to take immediately. It's actually quite nice to just sort of keep this tension there, because if we keep the tension, it sort of makes our opponents guess of where we're going to develop. Like if we take immediately, then they're like, okay, everything's good. They've taken, I can react appropriately. But when you don't take it, when you sort of play the game of cat and mouse, you sort of leave them questioning when you're going to take. And the timing that capture is obviously crucial. And I'm going to show you how you should time that capture. So queen to d7. I'm running out of water, which is terrible. Now we take. Once our opponents have sort of made the commitment of being on d7, right in the crossfires of this diagonal, we castle, play bishop g2, preparing e4 in some cases. Bishop d6, we retreat to bishop g3. Again, if our opponents want to capture this bishop, they're going to capture it on our terms. We're going to take back with the h-pawn, sort of reconnecting our structure and opening the rook. King b8, king b1, the classic, king shuffle, the mirror king shuffle. And I think I ended it here because this is sort of just like a side variation. So again, I've tried to sort of go in depth at the critical moments and then sort of give more of a general overview in the more sidelines, which you should still sort of be familiar with. Anyways, to sort of conclude this position, the main point is that the structure is a bit weak, right? You've got 3 pawns sort of in the center. Like the center, you might think is just the E and D file, but sort of the F and C files are also part of the center because they can be advanced to challenge the center. So e4 is going to be an idea. This e6 pawn is going to be a target as well. Again, it's just very normal. You can play rook e1, preparing e4. The bishop is also quite strong, so if you can get some, open up this diagonal, maybe some pressure on b7 at some point. So anyways, back to the main line. There's the move c6 here, which is a transposition. And I think in the chapter where I cover the move 3 c6, literally this entire chapter, it's the smallest one, I believe, because everything just transposes. So I think this is sort of the most critical chapter in regard to the c6 setup. And in this case, after c6, because our opponents have sort of spent this tempo on c6, we're going to play f3. And you might ask yourself, okay, if we're playing f3 here, why not play f3 here? Well, the inclusion of e3 and c6, this extra tempo, including these two moves, is just at our advantage because c6 just doesn't do as much as e3, because e3 allows us to develop the bishop in the next tempo. So again, there are just so many moves here. This is just another dimension, right? So our opponents can continue to develop normally with e6. They can sort of play h6 in anticipation of g4. They can play h5, directly stopping g4. They can also go bishop g6 in direct anticipation of g4, just stepping out of the way. I think the most logical by far is e6. So after g4, bishop g6, h4. We're forcing the dilemma of h6 or h5. I think h5 is the most natural. It's just sort of forcing a decision. And after g5, the knight can retreat to d7. It can also retreat to g8. The idea behind g8 is to sort of, after bishop d3, to play knight e7 to either recapture or bring the knight to f5, where it could target the h4 pawn. Knight to d7 is just sort of, can be prepared. C5 knight here, can also come to b6 in some cases. I think knight d7 is a bit more natural. Maybe a stronger player might play knight to g8. And now in this case, we play knight to e2, and we're actually going to hold off on this bishop d3 idea, because this bishop is actually sort of a target. And the idea behind knight e2 is we're going to play bishop to g3. As I meant, I have the arrows already here. Look at me working so hard. And we're going to sort of force this bishop just to make a decision. Because if we can ever take this bishop, like trade the bishop for the knight, then this, okay, let me just make some random moves. Like let's say knight a6, bishop g3, bishop b7, knight f4. I'm going to delete this later, but let's say we were to be able to take this, then this doubled pawns ruins the structure, right? And knight's going to come in. This is g6 is going to fall, right? You can even go c3, queen c2 to create a battery. Maybe not a battery. I don't know, what is that called? When a queen and a bishop are like working together, is that a battery? No, a battery is like a rook and a queen. What is that called? Oh my God. I don't know, like basic chess terminology. The thing is, I was actually studying chess terminology, but in Russian, because I've been working on my Russian. I can honestly just do this course in Russian if I'm being totally honest. But I don't think that the Russian audience would be as big as the American audience, because I'm just a pure sellout. But it's probably in that Russian. I probably know it in Russian what this is called, but I just don't know it in English, which is just a representation of my lack of general knowledge, of course. So, anyways, that's the plan there. After knight g8, the idea is to play queen d2, and it's actually quite a nice idea. Bishop d6, we play takes queen h2. And I just love this idea because it's just so pretty to me. It's just so like, when do you get to play queen h2, right? To challenge this diagonal. And I think this theme with actually bringing the queen and the queens challenging each other on this h2 b8 diagonal is going to pop up throughout this course. But basically the point is that, the dark squares are extremely weak. So if you trade the queens, those can be quite a few weaknesses. For example, the queen straight here, you castle, and the knight comes to h3, then comes to f4, where it targets h5 and g6. So there's just some long-term weaknesses and holes in this position that we're going to be targeting. So I had this even in a game, I believe. I definitely did not play queen d2, but this is just a really nice idea. And if knight to d7, we're going to play a3, sort of stopping bishop to b4. And then again, we're going to go for the same knight h3, bishop g3, knight h, knight f4 idea. So again, the idea is sort of stay the same. Bishop d6 in this position is just the only place where we take and go for this queen h2 idea. And you might ask, okay, like what if the queen just like moves away? But okay, if the queen moves away anywhere, you just castle, right? And this queen actually dominates this diagonal, which is actually crucial for these weak like dark square holes with this structure. The knight's going to come to f4, bishop can come to d3, e4 is even an option as well. Taking what the f5 square if the knight wanted to come to e7 to f5. So again, this is just great. So if they play h6, then we play bishop d3, and they're sort of forced to take it, right? Because we're threatening to double these pawns. So after takes, we actually play queen takes here, and a lot of you might wonder why not pawn takes, because in the previous chapter this chapter, in the main line, we are sort of playing bishop d3 to provoke them to play takes, and then we're playing all these moves. We were doing basically everything just to take with the c pawn. So you're probably like, well, why not here, right? But the simple answer is that in that position, we sort of hadn't really burned our bridges on the king side. Like we're not really going to be castling king side here, and the positional play here, the positional slow play, just that ship just kind of sailed once we sort of moved all of our kingside pawns, because there's sort of weaknesses unless we go for a very concrete attack. So it's important to take with the queen here, castle, and go for just an immediate attack and show them the power of the Jobava London. So in this case, you can play knight to b7, but it's probably quite natural to play bishop d6 to sort of neutralize this bishop. But I think I'll start with knight to d7 and castle b5, trying to get some counterplay. It's going to be a race. We play king to b1, simply sidestepping, protecting the a2 pawn, like queen a5 might happen with b4 to target the a2 pawn, but now that king's already defending it, so b4, knight e2. c5, again, really concrete stuff, but now we take. And the idea is, again, if we can get g5 in, then we're sort of taking away all of black's safety on the king side. And if black can't castle king side, again, black's already sort of extended with these pawns on the queen side, so the king's just going to be stuck in the center. So in this case, like bishop takes c5 would just allow like knight h3 followed by g5 and then g6, and everything's just sort of collapsing. e4 as a break as well, opening things up. So our opponents have to be pretty concrete with how quickly their counterplay comes. And then now for knight takes c5, again, g5 is going to come. There's knight g3, knight h3, g5. Black's king is the center. White's play is extremely natural. What more can you ask for? So in this position, there's also bishop d6, directly challenging. We're going to play knight e2. If they take it, queen d6. And the funny thing is, I played this in an over-the-board game, and I actually took with a pawn here. And this was like one of the first times I played the Jobava London in an over-the-board game, and I lost. And I think that was just like a really depressing experience for me, because it was the last round of this tournament, and me losing actually made this guy become an international master. And the satanic side of me loves to ruin people's like norms. Like if I'm able to ruin someone's norm or stop them from becoming like a grandmaster and national master, like I take great pleasure in that, because like people like have like gone out of their way to ruin my norms. Like there's been times like I needed draws, or like people have like made personal sacrifices just to like ruin my chances of getting norms. So I just take like, very satanic joy in ruining people's days and ruining their hopes and dreams and making them cry. So me handing him his international title on a silver platter just made me really depressed. I guess he was happy, but that happiness really made me sad. I took with a pawn, which is just doubling the structure. There's no need to do that, right? I can just play knight takes, queen d6 castles, and then g5 is coming next. It's just sort of the dream, right? G5, and now we go queen d2, or we go queen d2 rather. Sort of indirectly protecting the knight. Now e4 is coming. And then you sort of just have even g6 as an idea. All the breaks are sort of looming. You've got control. You've got central control. Knight on g8's passive. Black's king still in the center. You've got clear initiative, e4. And here, there's so many ideas, right? Knight h5 is an idea looming if the king stays in the center. There's like rook g1, there's g6, there's e5. Like there's so many ideas just that are at your disposal, right? And Black has to be conscious and aware of all of them at every single moment. They have to consider all the different ideas, right? The knights are well placed. The knights are super passive and restricted. This knight just can't really go anywhere, right? It's just maybe that's going to go backwards. So I wish I had made this course before this game because I would have crushed his happiness, taken away his happiness. That's what your goal as a chess player should be, to take away their happiness. And this is where you question my sanity for the 5th time, or 50th or 500th time in this course. Anywho, going back to the sort of the main line. In this case, so we covered e6, right? I think another logical way is to go h6 to prevent this after bishop h7. Again, I think the great part about this position is like you might be overwhelmed by 4 different moves here, but the ideas just sort of remain the same in all of these positions. So h6, g4, bishop d3. We take. The rook doesn't really want to take. It's sort of better to take the knight, right? Because you still retain some castling abilities. But I guess you could argue because here, you don't really want to play knight f6. You want to sort of develop other pieces first. But anyways, rook h7 is always sort of pretty awkward. Anyways, knight h7. Queen comes to d3, sort of preparing castles. Knight d7, castles. b5. Again, we're getting this race. Black is trying to create immediate counterplay. We play h4. Again, preparing g5 in some respect. We're threatening to play g5 here because if h takes, you cannot recapture because of the pin. So Black is actually forced to play knight to f6. And after king b1, we're actually going to transpose. After b4, knight ce2, c5, takes, queen d4. We've actually transposed to the main position that we got. I'll go through it one more time just to show you. After e6, g4, bishop g6, h6, knight d7, castles b5, king b1, queen d4. So this is a transposition. And I'll just go through the other order just to show you it again. h6, takes, queen d4, transposition. So as I mentioned before, you're going to go knight h3, you're going to prepare g5, knight can come to g3. There's the e4 break as well. Again, king's in the center, break open the center, attack the king. Basic, simple, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. I should stop saying that, but I know I'm not going to. So h6 is just sort of a transposition in the sort of critical moments. h5 is another important moment. This is where we actually get to take the positional route. Here we play bishop d3, and after bishop takes, our opponents have sort of stopped our big expansion. So here we just play c takes d3, and we actually argue that h5 is an overextension and a weakness. And it's actually beneficial for opponents to have the move h5 included because sometimes knight h5 is an idea to attack this bishop. However, we're not worried about that just yet. So after e6, knight e2, h4, threatening knight h5, we simply go h3. Oh my God. As I mentioned before, I need to do the move trainer. Oh my God. I think this just shows how good the move trainer is because like I've used it and I obviously practice it and it's just stuck in my head. But I don't know. Sometimes my brain just tells me the wrong thing because h3 is a very logical move, right? Because I'm giving the space. But of course, e4 is just a much better way to do it because you're just retreating here. If knight h5, and you're also preparing e5 in some cases, taking some central space. So bishop e7, rook c1, and again, rook c1 is just a prophylaxis to if they try to play c5. Sort of having the rook on the c file is quite useful. Castles can come. Queen b3 is always an idea. This h4 pawn is more of a weakness than a strength to be fully honest, in this case. So I guess the last thing to discuss here is bishop g6, but again, it transposes as well after h4, e6, g4. And we transpose to the position after e6, g4, bishop g6, h4. So you also notice that sometimes there might be a lot of different moves, but again, a lot of them just lead to sort of the same ideas and same positions and orders. So yeah, I believe I've covered sort of all the theoretical lines in this specific position. To sort of sum it up, basically, to sum it up, right, when we go e6, in this position, we're going to be playing bishop d3 to sort of try to double these pawns, or also provoke our opponents to play c takes d3, bring the queen to b3, and put some pressure on the queen side. When our opponents are playing a6, we're going to use this time to go for a very immediate attack with knight f3, knight e5, playing g4, h4. And then when our opponents play c6, we're going to go for this sort of f3 break, right? To go g4, h4, bishop d3, and we're going to sort of castle queen side and go for the immediate sort of attack on the king side with the eventual g5 breakthrough. So in all three of these moves, you're going to sort of see like different concrete ideas, but the general themes in all these three different sub positions of the main 3 bishop f5 move order all remain pretty similar in each different move. So you're going to become accustomed to all of these eventually once you sort of practice and go through the move trainer. So I hope you guys enjoyed this chapter on the 3 bishop f5, and I'm looking forward to the next.